someone who takes advantage of a young girl in their office. I mean, really. And then they have the gall to stand up and say Republicans are having a war on women. So, yes, I think it's a factor. Now, it's not Hillary's fault. And
but it should be an issue.
But it is a factor in judging Bill Clinton in history.
Right, but is it something that Hillary Clinton should be judged on if she were a candidate in 2016?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. This was with regard to the Clintons, and sometimes it's hard to separate one from the other.
Well, Meet the Press, Senator Rand Paul answering a series of questions from David Gregory. Started with talk about Mike Huckabee, the former Arkansas governor, Fox News colleague, and his statements about libido at the RNC. It ended up quoting Paul's wife, Kelly, who said that President Clinton's, quote, predatory affair with intern Monica Lewinsky was a bad thing. This is what Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post had to say about that today.
There's only two ways, or there seemed to be a tendency to talk about women in two ways when it comes to sex and sexual activity. Either they're terrible victims preyed on by older men, as in Monica Lewinsky. President Clinton did a bad thing. Monica Lewinsky was not precisely an innocent victim. I recall some thong flashing there.
Okay, so with all this, we're back with our panel. Charles, what about this whole thing, this back and forth, and the interpretation of what's being said?
I thought we were done with that, like 15 years ago. That was suffering enough, having to spend a year and a half or two on that. Look, as a matter of pure politics, I don't think what Rand Paul said is a very good idea. The reason is this. It's going to look like guilt by association. She wasn't the one involved, unless you want to get in the weeds and remake the arguments that she enabled or she covered up or whatever. Do you really want to talk about that? And people will say this is old news, and we've heard it, and the country made a judgment on it, it moved on. But here's the biggest irony of all. When Republicans tried all this in 1998, when the issue was red hot, and you had a midterm election, they got crushed. So, I mean, if it's not going to work at the time that it's, you know, it's at its worst, why would you bring it up? I just think Republicans have so much else they can talk about. This is a failed administration. We have high unemployment, the worst recovery. You can talk about the women's issues in terms of late-term abortion and other stuff, and to get into issues that only play on stereotypes that make the GOP look bad is simply a political error of a major sort.
Not the best booking of this panel with four guys on this panel, but Chuck, your thoughts?
Well, what I thought was Rand Paul was kind of rambling there, not only in the sense that Charles talks about, but another point which you didn't show, he starts saying the whole war on women is a myth, women are winning. And then he cites a whole bunch of statistics, you know, that 60% of the people in law school are women. That isn't true. It's 48%, according to the American Bar Association. He says 55% of the people in medical school are women. That isn't true. It's 47%, according to the American Association of Medical Colleges. He said Monica Lewinsky was only 20 years old when all this happened. No, she was 25. In other words, I watched that interview and I said to myself, does Rand Paul even know what he's talking about? He began by saying we have a dumbed-down debate about the war on women where people ignore the facts, and then he proceeded to launch into a string of erroneous factual mistakes.
Well, he was close.
Yeah, well, he was in the ballpark. But no, the serious point is, here's a guy exaggerating the success of women in an attempt to rebut the Democratic argument.
Let's
and
hear,
in fact, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Let's hear from a woman, a former Democratic aide, Penny Lee.
The Republicans are struggling with how they deal and relate to women, and to attack potentially the first woman president, I think is very foolish.
Steve.
Well, look, I think Charles is right. I think Chuck is right to a certain extent. Maybe Rand Paul could have solved this problem if he had only footnoted the speech as he did there. No. But look, there's a serious point, and in the way Rand Paul maybe didn't make it very well, but there was a serious point that we were having this debate over the war on women, a debate which was started by President Obama and Democrats for purely political purposes. We were having that debate in the context of things like Bob Filner, the aftermath of Anthony Weiner, all of this stuff. There's no discussion of any of that, and I think Rand Paul was saying, look, Look over there before you start making these claims over here. Now, I agree with Charles in particular about the politics of this. I mean, Hillary Clinton is at her most sympathetic in the context of what happened in that, you know, terrible time in our history and certainly in her history. So the last thing you want to do is frame her candidacy in that same context. I think there are plenty of places not only to talk about the Obama administration, but to talk about Hillary Clinton. Look at the mess. Look at the world today. Look at Benghazi, the things that she's bringing up in speeches today. So there are better ways to do it, but I certainly understand the impulse of him wanting to actually go back hard on that question.
That is it for the panel.